I'm joined now by the U.S. Senator from California, Adam Schiff. Senator, thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you.
So first and foremost, we have seen the ways in which Donald Trump has continued to target his political enemies. We've seen indictments from James Comey, of Letitia James. When Donald Trump wrote a message that we now know, thanks to the Wall Street Journal, was supposed to be a DM to Pam Bondi, he included, "Pam, I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing's being done. What about Comey, Adam, Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing's going to be done." So we have seen that since that message to Pam Bondi, that Comey and Letitia James have both been indicted, have both been caught up in the dragnet that is Trump's weaponized Department of Justice. You're the third name in there. And so to what extent are you concerned about the prospect of Trump weaponizing the DOJ against you?
Well, look, I think anyone who's on the president's enemies list has to expect that Donald Trump may very well go after them. And this is the thing, this is a growing list. And yes, I'm apparently near the top of the list, but it's a long growing list. We saw the president add Jack Smith to the list and Lisa Monaco to the list and others, Andrew Weissman to the list. Every day, every week, it's the mayor of Chicago, the governor of Illinois gets put on the president's enemies list and threatened with prosecution. Now, I spent almost 6 years with the Justice Department in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and this is unprecedented. I would have never dreamed that a president would instruct an attorney general to basically try to prosecute his political opponents. And in the case of Letitia James and James Comey, the Republican U.S. attorney was fired because he didn't think there was any there, and replaced by Donald Trump's personal lawyer who sought the indictments. So this is the worst abuse of the Justice Department we've ever seen. And the president certainly is making it clear he's only getting started. But it's also, Brian, of a piece with other actions by the president, by the administration, to weaponize the powers of the federal government against the American people. So that includes using the military in American cities. It includes using the FCC to try to kick late night comedians off the air, or using the power to deprive media companies of mergers, to extort payments to the president. All of these attacks on universities and law firms are part of the same effort to intimidate and silence critics. And I can tell you this, no matter what they throw my way, I am not going to be silenced. I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm going to continue to hold this president accountable.
A lot of the Republicans' brand was predicated on this idea that they were against the weaponization of the government. They literally had a subcommittee about the weaponization of government when Joe Biden was president. And so in your conversations with your Republican colleagues, is there any sense of discomfort at them doing the very thing that they predicated their brands on purportedly being against?
There's a lot of discomfort with how the administration is conducting whole lines of operations, whether they're military, use of the military in cities, abuse of the Justice Department, or, for example, Pam Bondi's stonewalling of congressional oversight. For those of your viewers who watched her before the Judiciary Committee a week or so ago, I had a number of Republicans afterwards basically say they thought her performance embarrassing and a charade. But are they willing to say anything publicly or willing to do anything legislatively? Thus far, the answer is no. They are fully intimidated. I had one Republican senator tell me, it's not just that he will go after them the same way he's going after me, and they fear that, but it's also that he will punish their entire state. And so they acknowledge what a personally vindictive president this is, and his willingness to abuse the powers of the government to punish them and their states.
Given that we've seen him abuse those powers, given that we've seen him, subvert the Constitution to be able to send ICE into cities and federal troops into cities in defiance of posse comitatus, and that really he's not bound by any law, statute, or even the Constitution, do you have any concern that he may try to take this to its logical, natural conclusion and invoke the Insurrection Act, whether he uses the No Kings protest as a pretext to be able to do that, or whether he just has no pretext to be able to do that, but says we're facing an invasion, a rebellion, an insurrection from the radical Marxist leftists out there, and so we have no choice but to allow me as president to usurp all power and invoke the Insurrection Act.
I'm increasingly concerned that he will do exactly that, and most particularly because his actions keep getting struck down in court. So he's deploying the National Guard and the active duty military to American cities to be used against American citizens, and increasingly courts are striking it down. The federal district court in Portland, Oregon, for example, said that the presentation the Justice Department made in support of this, what were clearly violations of the law against using the military for law enforcement, that their presentations were untethered by facts. They were basically devoid of any factual basis.
And that was a judge, by the way, who Trump himself appointed, Judge Immergut.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we're seeing judges in Illinois, in California, and elsewhere reach the same conclusion, that the Department of Justice, representing the administration in these cases, is acting in bad faith, representing things that simply are not true or provably false, and in fact are making the situation in these cities more dangerous than before the introduction of troops. Now, it may very well be, and I think Stephen Miller is signaling this, that if they keep losing on the lawless rationale they're using, they may try to invoke a different lawless rationale, and that is invoke the Insurrection Act. And that also clearly doesn't apply here, but it gives them another bite at the apple, gives them another chance to deploy American troops against the will of mayors and governors and the American people. So I am increasingly concerned about it. And when these cases or a challenge to that act goes to the Supreme Court, I have no confidence in the Supreme Court and its willingness to stand up to this president, because they simply have refused to do so up to this point.
As it relates to this DOJ, we have seen so much egregious lawlessness from the federal agencies, from ICE, for example. There are so many videos and images of ICE just barreling people down with no justification to do so, crashing their cars into people, tackling people to the ground, injuring them, refusing to identify themselves, refusing to wear any insignia, basically acting as like Donald Trump's personal secret police force, accountable to no one and nothing. And so when we see such lawlessness at the hands of the federal government, is there any remedy when they, like, knowing full well that the DOJ is never going to rein in their own agents, is there any remedy here for Americans who are the victims of this lawlessness?
Well, there is a near-term remedy which has, often been successful, and that is litigation. People are suing the government and they are winning. Cities are suing, governors are suing, private organizations are suing, and they're often winning. You have people who are U.S. citizens, for example, suing over their illegal detention. We just saw a report today from ProPublica about 170 U.S. citizens unlawfully detained, sometimes for days. So that litigation is really one of the most important tools we have. Is there some broader form of accountability that will come later, though, for these lawless actions, for a Department of Justice misrepresenting the facts to the courts? Hard to see that happening at all during this administration. Will it happen in the future during a different administration? We can only hope there'll be some form of accountability for this, harm they're doing and the flagrant lawlessness of it.
Do you think that Democrats have the stomach, though, for that? I mean, the reality is that we saw a lawless Trump 1.0, and what followed was a DOJ led by Merrick Garland, who I think was more focused on preserving the optics of a non-politicized DOJ than actually looking to hold people accountable for what they'd done. Certainly much more circumspect and judicious than any DOJ that we'd seen recently, and certainly more than Donald Trump and his acolytes deserved. And so do you think that in the event that we are fortunate enough to see democracy survive this and for Democrats to actually get into power, that they will have the stomach to really hold the folks who are engaged in all of this lawlessness to account to the extent that they need to be held accountable.
There has to be accountability. Otherwise, those that are engaged in these lawless actions will feel there's no repercussion now or even in the future. And you're right, the Republicans have continually tried to paint this false picture of terrible weaponization of that under that well-known partisan, they say, Merrick Garland, as if Merrick Garland was some kind of a rabid partisan, far from the truth. And they want to draw this false equivalence between investigating and prosecuting a president for inciting a violent attack on the Capitol, in which hundreds of police officers were beaten, illegally bringing boxes and boxes of classified documents to his home, and then obstructing the investigation into it. They want to somehow equate that, those lawful actions to hold someone responsible, with the lawless actions of this president, who is, unlike Joe Biden, anything Joe Biden ever did, basically telling the department, I want you to prosecute this enemy. Yeah. I want you to prosecute that enemy. I want you to prosecute this other enemy. And for those who lawlessly carry out those directives, who violate the Justice Department manuals, who violate the ethics laws under their state bar organizations, there has to be accountability. And it may not come now, but it has to come at some point in the future.
Do you think that the bar, for example, should also be revisiting its own standards in terms of giving power to people who are very clearly content to abuse it? I mean, we have seen many instances in which Trump's attorneys have been disbarred, have lost their law licenses. We've seen Jenna Ellis and John Eastman and Jeffrey Clark, Rudy Giuliani. But the reality is there are plenty more lawyers who are out there working for him. And I feel like a lot of the remedy to this is just kind of retroactively, once the damage has been done, wait a year or two before there's finally some accountability. But that doesn't help us in the situation that we're in right now. And Trump himself knows full well that he can always find another attorney who's willing to use their power to kind of give some legal weight to carry out his illegal plans. And so does there need to be some change as far as the bar is concerned, to not empower these people to do what very clearly they're perfectly content to do if it means they get into Trump's good graces and have some proximity to power?
I think the bar has rules of ethical conduct that are being violated all the time. Now, whether the bar has the wherewithal to enforce those rules of conduct is very difficult. Whether the bar in a disciplinary proceeding could get the kind of discovery it would need to hold people accountable. But what we see really, one effective check we've had, though it has its limits, is people who are willing to uphold their oath of office and their ethical obligations are quitting rather than engage in unlawful conduct or immoral conduct. We're seeing that at the Department of Justice, where people are being fired because they won't do unethical things, or they're quitting because they won't do unethical things. I keep thinking, for example, the prosecutors who were working on the corruption case against the mayor of New York and were instructed to dismiss the case because the mayor was useful to the president on a completely unrelated policy matter, that is immigration. And they asked these senior prosecutors, these public corruption prosecutors, to dismiss the case, and they refused. And one of them said, you may be able to find some coward or some fool to take this action, but that was never going to be me. And, people like that who are demonstrating courage, and not just at the Justice Department, they're at the CDC and refusing to bless vaccine recommendations that are at odds with the science and give in to conspiracy thinking. And at every agency who are saying, no, I'm not doing that. That would violate my code of ethics and the law. That's been really important. These people are heroes. And others who step in and say, okay, if they won't do it, I'll do it. I'll do whatever I can to get that appointment, to get that advancement. I hope they're held accountable for violating their ethical requirements, for violating their department policies. I hope there is accountability.
We'll leave it there. Senator Schiff, appreciate your time.
You bet. Thank you.